Get ready for a journey back in time, to an era where the dust of the roads and the secrets of hearts mingled under the same sky. There are stories that life insists on whispering, truths so powerful that they seem to have been hidden in the fold of time, too fear to be proclaimed aloud. But to understand the depth of faith and the unexpected path of redemption, we need to lift the veil from one of these silenced narratives. It is the story of Tamar, whose name echoes with the strength and resilience of a palm tree, and her journey offers us one of the most profound explained biblical stories. Have you ever wondered why certain passages of Scripture are read quickly, almost with a certain embarrassment, while others are celebrated? Why some names, crucial to the grand tapestry of life, seem to get lost in the silence between one verse and another, as if they held a secret too heavy to be revealed? The story of Tamar is, without a doubt, one of these, a woman often forgotten in the pages, but whose legacy is so revolutionary that it questions the powerful, unsettles the comfortable, and, above all, reveals a higher power who acts in absolutely surprising ways, working to what is considered broken and imperfect. This is one of the most fascinating explained biblical stories, demonstrating the hand of God amidst human complexity and a surprising way of acting, even in the subtext of lives that seem lost or dishonored. In this deep dive, we will open the doors of this ancient silence, tread the dust of distant lands, and feel the echo of deep pain, but also the flame of unwavering courage and challenging defiance. And when the full truth unfolds before our eyes, you will understand why, for the divine plan, Tamar's name was never forgotten and its relevance to the coming of Jesus. If this journey already touches your heart, I invite you to subscribe for more stories that unravel mysteries and inspire faith. The journey begins more than 3,800 years ago, under a scorching sun, in a vast and often merciless land. A young woman, Tamar, walked. Her name, in its essence, means palm tree, a living symbol of resistance that bends but never breaks. And, like that tree, Tamar would stand tall, firm, even in the face of the most furious winds, those that seem to want to destroy her. Her resilience places her among the most notable women of the Bible. But to fully comprehend Tamar's saga, we must first understand the setting. The narrative begins in a certain chapter and verse of Scriptures, telling us that, at that time, Judah left his brothers and went down to a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. Judah, one of the sons of the great patriarch, began to forge an independent path, moving a little away from the family core. And it was in this new environment that he met the daughter of a Canaanite named Shua, and took her as his wife, cohabiting with her, as reported in a subsequent chapter and verse. From this marriage, 3 sons were born. The first, as recorded in a certain chapter and verse, was named Er. Later, in another chapter and verse, Onan was born. And finally, in yet another chapter and verse, Shelah came into the world, born while his mother was in Chezib. Judah's family was forming, laying the groundwork for the events that would follow, and deeply marked the story of Tamar and Judah. Her life, at first, seemed to follow a path of peace and stability. In a certain chapter and verse, it is revealed to us that Judah took a wife for Er, his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. It was a marriage within a respected family, a promise of a future. But behind the scenes of apparent tranquility, destiny was already weaving its intricate threads. Holy Scripture tells us, in a certain chapter and verse, that Er, Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord put him to death. Suddenly, Tamar found herself a widow. The shock must have been immense, the sadness profound, the pain indescribable. The story of Tamar had already begun with tragedy. This makes us realize that, at times, life strikes us with brutality, turning promises into ruins in the blink of an eye. We must not underestimate the fragility of human plans and the speed with which existence can surprise us. In a world where inheritance and lineage were everything, a woman in this condition was often seen as cursed, forgotten, without a place. The prospect of a helpless life was real and terrifying. However, the laws of her people offered a small ray of hope, the law of levirate marriage. This ancient law, described in a chapter and verse of the laws of the time, dictated that the brother of the deceased should marry the widow to carry on the name of the deceased brother's family, ensuring the continuity of the lineage and protection of the woman. Judah, her father-in-law, called Onan his second son and told him, Go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her. Raise up offspring for your brother, as recorded in a certain chapter and verse. It was Tamar's responsibility and right to have children and keep her first husband's name alive through his brother. But Onan also failed to honor the law. A certain chapter and verse reveals his selfish heart. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So whenever he went into his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. He sought pleasure without the responsibility of a promise, without commitment to God's law and to the family. His attitude, which showed contempt both for the law and for Tamar's dignity and his brother's memory, was evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord put him to death also, according to the dramatic revelation in another chapter and verse. 2 brothers were gone, and young Tamar was left amidst the ashes of her hopes, deepening the drama in her story of Tamar and Judah. This helps us understand that the intentions of the heart surpass the mere performance of physical acts. True obedience and true commitment go beyond the surface, delving into the sincerity of our purposes. Refusal to do what is right, however small the perceived flaw, can lead to profound consequences, showing the seriousness with which we must face our commitments. Judah, now, saw her with a mixture of fear and superstition. In his eyes, she was cursed. Fearing the loss of his last son, Shelah, he told Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Remain a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up," for he feared that he too might die, like his brothers, as told in a chapter and verse. So Tamar returned to her father's house, with the empty promise that he would call her back when Shelah grew up. This reminds us that unfulfilled promises, often born of fear and not justice, carry weight. We should reflect on the responsibility we assume with our words and their impact on the lives of others. Tamar obeyed. She waited. Days turned into months, months into years. But Judah never called her again. Can you feel the weight of that silence? The suffocating anguish of a dying promise, a fading future? Every wedding feast she heard from a distance, every child's laughter echoing through her village, served as a cruel reminder of what she had been denied. Injustice had a face, and it was Judah's. The delay in her case placed her in a position of dishonor and helplessness. Judah's failure to keep his word revealed a deep moral flaw, which would become central to the story of Tamar and Judah. Her waiting was not passive, but an experience of profound injustice. Her story compels us to look at people in waiting situations and question whether that waiting is fair, or if in reality, it is a form of silent neglect. The painful experience of being forgotten, as Tamar was by Judah, urges us to recognize and not ignore those whom society tends to leave behind. But herein lies the essence of explained biblical stories. When human promises fail, the great storyteller continues to write. Years passed, and in a certain chapter and verse, we are informed that Shua's daughter, Judah's wife, died. After a period of mourning, and having comforted himself, Judah went up to Timnah to shear his sheep, accompanied by his friend Hira the Adullamite. This journey would be the turning point in the story of Tamar. The news, crucial to the unfolding of events, reached Tamar. She was told, "Your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep," as recorded in a chapter and verse. The man who had stolen her destiny was passing nearby, and something within her, a mixture of faith, fury, perhaps both, awakened. If no one would fight for her justice, she would. Faith, we see here, is not a passive attitude, but could be a powerful engine for bold action. Tamar did not resign herself to indefinite waiting. She took control of her own situation, driven by a deep conviction that her right was legitimate. Her indignation, far from being destructive, was a force that propelled her to seek the restoration of her dignity, showing that righteous indignation can be a catalyst for change. If this narrative has given you a new perspective, hit like and help share this powerful message with more people. Tamar acted with determination. In a chapter and verse, we read that she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance to a name, which is on the way to Timnah. Her motivation was clear and urgent, for she saw that Shelah had grown up, yet she had not been given to him as a wife. She was not just seeking personal satisfaction. She was seeking fulfillment of her right and the continuation of a lineage that had been promised and denied to her. Her strategy, bold for one of the women of the Bible, demonstrated remarkable inner strength. What we can gather from this is about ingenuity in the face of adversity. Tamar used her intelligence to create a situation that would allow her to reclaim what was due to her. This makes us think that, at times, it is necessary to challenge conventions to find solutions to complex problems. The sun began to set when a man approached. He did not recognize her. He thought she was a prostitute because she had covered her face, according to Judah's perception recorded in a certain chapter and verse. It was Judah, the same man who had denied her justice, now desired her, unaware of her true identity. In a chapter and verse, it is described that Judah turned off the road to go to her and said, "Come, let me lie with you." He did not know it was his daughter-in-law. Tamar shrewdly asked, "What will you give me to lie with you?" Judah replied that he would send her a young goat from his flock. But Tamar, with the wisdom of one who plans every step, demanded a pledge until the goat was delivered. She asked, as recorded in a chapter and verse, "Your signet, your cord, and the staff in your hand." Judah gave them to her and then lay with her. At that moment, neither of them knowing the extent of what was happening, she conceived by him. Tamar's plan was audacious, dangerous. If discovered, the punishment would be severe, but her courage burned more intensely than her fear. This reveals to us the blindness of prejudice and unchecked desire. Judah, a man of authority, was unable to recognize the daughter-in-law he had wronged, blinded by his own desires. A truth that emerges is that appearances can be deceiving, and hasty judgment can lead us to make serious mistakes. The value of identity symbols is another facet that stands out. The signet, the cord, and the staff were not mere objects. They represented Judah's authority and identity. Tamar knew exactly what to ask for to have irrefutable proof, demonstrating the importance of having concrete evidence. Immediately after the act, in another chapter and verse, she arose and went away, and took off her veil, and put on the garments of her widowhood. Tamar returned to her usual appearance, while Judah continued on his way, without suspecting the true identity of the woman he had been with. Later, according to the account in a certain chapter and verse, Judah sent the promised young goat through his friend Hira, the Adullamite, to reclaim the pledge. But Hira did not find her. He asked the men of that place, "Where's the prostitute who was at a name by the roadside?" But the answer in a chapter and verse was clear. There has been no prostitute here. Hira returned to Judah and told him that he had not found her, and that the men of the place denied the existence of such a woman. Faced with this, in another chapter and verse, Judah, fearing public shame and disgrace, said, "Let her keep them, lest we be shamed. See, I sent this young goat, and you did not find her." He preferred to abandon the pledge rather than risk a new search that could expose his own moral failing. The story of Tamar and Judah took on even more complex contours. Here we perceive the human attempt to cover up error. Judah was more concerned with his reputation than with correcting the injustice he had committed. This shows us the danger of valuing public image more than personal integrity. About 3 months later, the bomb exploded. News of Tamar's pregnancy spread, and in a certain chapter and verse, it was told to Judah, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot. Moreover, she is pregnant by harlotry." Judah's reaction was rage, a rage laden with hypocrisy and self-righteousness. "Bring her out," he commanded, "and let her be burned." This command, found in a chapter and verse of scriptures, shows how blind judgment can be when one does not see one's own guilt. What we can learn from this is about the irony of hypocrisy. Judah, who had just sinned with a woman he thought was a prostitute, readily condemned Tamar to capital punishment for a crime he himself unknowingly had co-committed. This challenges us to look inward before judging others, recognizing our own flaws. The crowd gathered. Tamar was brought, veiled, trembling, yet resolute. In her hands, she held the pledges, the signet, the cord, and the staff. And, with a soft but firm voice, she uttered the words that would change everything. In a chapter and verse, we read that she sent word to her father-in-law, "By the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant." And she added, "Please examine whose these are, the signet, the cord, and the staff." Judah froze, his breath caught in his throat. The truth, cruel and undeniable, pierced the curtain of his shame. Here we see the indomitable power of truth. Even in a moment of extreme danger, Tamar's simple presentation of the truth dismantled all fury and hypocrisy. This teaches us that, however frightening the truth may be, it has a liberating power capable of transforming situations. Judah's reaction was a moment of profound revelation. In a chapter and verse, it is recorded that Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I, because I did not give her to my son Shelah." And he did not lie with her again. At that moment, everything changed. The condemned woman was vindicated. The forgotten name was restored. And in the divine plan, a smile appeared. These were not just words of guilt. They were a confession before heaven. A powerful man, stripped of his pride, and a forgotten woman, clothed in divine justice. The story of Tamar revealed itself to be an instrument of God's will. What we can learn is about the capacity for recognition and humility. Judah had the greatness of spirit to acknowledge his error and the righteousness of Tamar's action, even if it humiliated him publicly. This shows us the importance of possessing humility to admit our flaws and change our perspective. A truth that stands out is that divine justice often operates in unexpected and even shocking ways by human standards. The way Tamar obtained her justice was not conventional, but it was the one that prevailed. This makes us realize that the paths of the higher power are higher than ours and can involve surprising twists. But this was only the beginning, for what Tamar carried within her was not just proof of her innocence. It was the beginning of a sacred lineage. In a certain chapter and verse, it happened that when the time came for her to give birth, behold, there were twins in her womb. The story of the wait and birth is equally dramatic. In a chapter and verse, when she was giving birth, one put out his hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, "This one came out first." But unexpectedly, he drew back his hand, and then, in a chapter and verse, his brother came out, and she said, "What breach you have made for yourself." So his name was called Perez, an unexpected breakthrough. Afterward, his brother came out who had the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah, as the last verse of the chapter tells us. The story of Tamar and Judah culminated with the birth of these twins, one of whom, Perez, would play a fundamental role in the genealogy of Jesus. Judah's words, "She is more righteous than I," hung heavy in the air. These were not just words of guilt. They were a confession before heaven. A powerful man, stripped of his pride, and a forgotten woman, clothed in divine justice. Tamar had no army, no wealth, no influential allies. Her only weapon was her courage, her only defense, the truth. And that was more than enough for the Creator. In a world where women's voices were often silenced, Tamar's voice echoed through the centuries. She did not shout. She did not curse. She simply revealed the truth. And when the truth came to light, even the most powerful bowed their heads. Tamar's life had been marked by injustice, but from a divine perspective, she was seen differently. She was not cursed. She had been chosen. Because in God's greater plan, redemption often begins in places the world calls shameful. What we can learn is that the plan of a higher power is indestructible. The promised lineage persisted, despite human failures and personal tragedies. This teaches us to trust that, even when all seems lost, a greater purpose is unfolding. What had begun as a scandal was now the beginning of salvation, an unexpected breakthrough. The name Perez means the one who breaks out, the one who breaks through. And indeed, through him, the divine plan was breaking the barriers of tradition and human judgment, paving the way for Jesus. But what does this mean for us today? Why would the great storyteller allow such a controversial story of Tamar to be written in his sacred word? Because the story of Tamar is not just about one woman. It is about every person who has ever been wronged, ignored, abandoned, or misunderstood. It is about a divine justice that does not follow human logic. Tamar teaches us that justice does not always arrive with thunder and lightning. Sometimes it manifests silently through a single act of courage. When a system failed, when a promise was broken, when society labeled her as unworthy, she rose, not to destroy, but to restore what had been lost. Her story whispers a truth that echoes through every generation. When men forget, the great Creator remembers. It is one of the most powerful explained biblical stories. This shows us that God is not limited by our standards of holiness or righteousness. He uses people in complex situations, and even in paths considered deviant, to achieve his purposes. This reveals the amplitude of grace and divine inclusion. Imagine the lonely nights Tamar spent waiting, the silent prayers whispered into the desert wind. How many times must she have asked, "Why me, Lord? Why this pain?" Yet, through that pain, a greater purpose was unfolding. Sometimes, the higher power does not remove suffering immediately. It transforms it into something eternal. A great truth here is that pain and suffering can be transformed into eternal purpose. Tamar's story reminds us that the adversities we face are not empty of meaning, but can be the incubators of a legacy of great impact. And this is where we begin to see the divine poetry of redemption. The woman Judah wanted to burn became a flame that would illuminate the path to Messiah. From Tamar's womb came Perez. From Perez came a lineage, and so on, until generations later came Boaz, the husband of Ruth. And from the same lineage, King David, and finally, Jesus himself. The story of Tamar and Judah intertwines with the greatest narrative of salvation. The woman once labeled improper became a cornerstone in the lineage of salvation. The Creator did not erase her story. He magnified it. Can you see the pattern? The Creator not only redeems lives, he redeems legacies. The same power that restored Tamar can restore the broken places in your life. He can transform moments of shame into testimonies of grace. It is one of the great lessons of the women of the Bible. You may feel forgotten like Tamar. You may have been unjustly judged. Your name may be whispered in rooms you never entered. Your heart may be bruised by promises that were never kept. But hear this truth. The great writer still writes with broken pens. He still builds with rejected stones. He still redeems the stories that others would rather hide. This shows us that our past does not disqualify us, but can position us for a greater purpose. Tamar is living proof that the most painful experiences and even failures can be fertile ground for the most significant work of a higher power in our lives. You're not disqualified by your past. You are positioned by his purpose. Tamar's courage teaches us three unshakable truths. First, when human justice fails, divine justice steps in. No injustice escapes the eyes of heaven, because God is always watching. Second, courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing faith in the midst of fear. Third, the great architect can transform your most painful chapter into the foundation of his greatest work. From Tamar came Perez. From Perez came King David. And from David came Jesus, the one who broke every curse, the true redeemer of every forgotten soul. The story of Tamar began with loss, but ended with an eternal legacy. And that is the same promise offered to you. If Tamar could speak today, she would whisper, "Do not give up when the world calls you unworthy, because the author of grace is not done writing your story." Her ashes became a crown. Her disgrace became divine destiny. Her silence became a song that still echoes in every heart that dares to believe that the higher power remembers the forgotten. Perhaps that is why the story of Tamar was kept hidden for so long, because the truth it carries is too powerful for complacent hearts. It reminds us that redemption is not polished. It is messy. It is written in tears and courage, in a faith that refuses to die. So, the next time you read the genealogy of Jesus and your eyes pass over that small line that mentions Tamar, remember the woman behind it. Tamar, a widow, a warrior, a vessel of redemption. Her story of Tamar and Judah is not just a piece of the past. It is a living reminder that, for the great architect, there are no disposable people. There are only lives waiting to discover their extraordinary purpose. This was the account of Tamar, the woman whose story transformed shame into a glorious destiny. One of the most impactful women of the Bible and one of the most important explained biblical stories. If this narrative has touched you and you know someone who needs to hear it, do not hesitate. Share this story so that Tamar's light can reach even more hearts.